the economy is just like absolutely on the brink right now, in large part because of tariffs. And we're facing a recession. Biotech is getting very crushed right now.
India and China make up more than half of our generic drug supply. That means we're going to have more likely higher pricing for consumers, pricing for health systems.
There have been some molecules that if you take it in China is already right now in phase 2. The same molecule in the US is still preclinical.
These tools are great because it keeps physicians happy and it reduces burnout. But we haven't laid anybody off or done anything that really kind of reduce costs at the system level.
Hospitals have had extraordinary bloated staff. They have relied on overstaffing. And I'm talking about administrative staff. I'm not talking about clinical staff. And it's just too much.
The whole industry is watching and waiting and just really kind of paying attention to what happens with Hinge. It would honestly have a real dampening effect on funding going into health tech if this IPO did not do well.
From innovation to actually reaching patients is like 17 years. And a lot of it has to do with FDA approvals to what you're talking about, but it's also payment, right? Have a way so that when you get FDA approvals, you also get a CMS code approved so that these things can come to market and have patient impact faster. That would be my one wish for this administration.
This is Second Opinion. I'm Christina Farr.
I'm Zenooz.
And I'm Luba Greenwood.
Welcome to the pod, where each week we navigate what's really going on in healthcare through strikingly candid conversations with the entrepreneurs and investors leading the charge.
Thanks for joining us. Let's dive in.
Hey guys, welcome back to Second Opinion. There is just so much going on right now in the news between the economy, the Hinge IPO, and maybe not IPO, which we'll talk about. Biotech stocks are just absolutely just taking a huge crash and nosedive right now. We want to talk about that. HES, that was last week, one of the biggest healthcare conferences of the year. Ash attended that one. So we wanted to get together and just seriously just have a little gossip, which is one of our favorite things to do. But we're going to do it on the pod. So welcome Ash Zenooz, Luba Greenwood, my co-host. So happy that we could find time to just like sit and have a chat.
I love it. I can't wait. So what are we going to start with? So much to cover.
Well, I for one would love to hear a little bit more about, Ash, your recent trip to HES. I actually have not gone to this conference ever. I think at some point I need to just go and hang out in the lobby of the hotel. So tell us about just the event itself, like what kinds of people tend to go, and then what were some of the kind of topics that were in the zeitgeist?
Yeah, I've been going to this thing on and off for a long time. And I think this is one of my favorite conferences to go to. I would prefer to go to this one in general over any other health tech conference. I guess the Ritz is undergoing some renovations that they had at the Waldorf Astoria, which is very nice, but also very big. And I thought that the conference was also a lot bigger. So to me, it was harder to connect with people the same way as I've done in the past. And I also think that as the conferences get bigger, you start seeing more commercial motion, which is a new thing for this particular conference. I'm not used to that either.
Quick question. Before you tell us kind of the substance, which I really want to dig into, can I just double click a bit on your point of, here you have this amazing conference, you're invited to everything. We all are kind of the high level, really exciting ones, but you're noticing this change that now it's bigger, it's not as intimate, it's a lot more commercial activity. I'm noticing that too with some of my favorite conferences. And they used to be in nice venues, and it's not so much even about how fancy the place is, but it's just more intimate, to your point. And then they were, some were commercial, but for me, for example, they didn't have that many vendors. And a lot of them have turned. I think that there's, at least on the biotech side, probably one or two only left. That you can actually go and connect, learn what is truly happening, and also have a discussion, share what you're thinking is happening, and have a real discussion and help figure out next steps and innovation, especially right now. I can't imagine a better time for these smaller conferences of leaders in the field really having true brainstorming sessions. And unfortunately, I'm just not seeing that anymore. All these conferences keep on growing. And I stopped going to many of them because you're just not getting the value that you used to. And so I guess my question is, what can one do? I understand that people that are putting together the conference, they need to make money, but should they charge more? Should they charge more, for example, for vendors instead of having 20 vendors or 100 vendors, maybe just have 3? So I want to kick it back to you and Chrissy.
I think this year I saw a lot more investors. I saw a lot more early stage companies, C-suite, beyond CEOs of early stage companies. And I thought that was new. There were a lot of like sidebar events, much more so than in the past, where people are having their own, breakfasts and dinners and summits, etc. So people were like divided up. So it felt a little disconnected, at least for me. But it was still a fantastic conference. I mean, the main stage had folks like, it was Dr. Oz, who just became the CMS administrator. He kicked off the conference. I think it was his first public appearance. And it was great to hear from him directly on how he's thinking about it. He's obviously very charismatic and a great communicator. So it was really easy for, at least for me, to hear from him, to understand like, how is he thinking about like what he wants to do at CMS. Chris Klomp, who's the incoming Medicare director, was on stage with David Brailer and Werner Thomas, who's the CEO of Sutter. And I thought they had a really open conversation on the changes and partnerships on how to build across payer, provider, pharma, and CMS. So that was really interesting. They had former CMS and CMMI directors from the Biden administration and other administrations. Andy Slavitt was up there. So we got to hear from a lot of people who've been in some of these government positions, but also been in the private sector, talking about the changes. So I thought they had a good mix of folks on stage, and the conversations were free flowing and it was easy to listen to. But I think it was more of the after, when you come out of the room, usually you're all in one place and you get to connect, you have lunch together, you run into people. And I thought there was less of that because there was a lot of like sidebar special events going on.
Yeah, but I think Luba's raises a good point, though, of just that it does feel like we say the same things year after year at some of these conferences. And I for one, am like really sick of going to panels about, why value-based care is so important and why we need AI in medicine and all these things, that it's like just become these sort of vapid talking points that we all say again and again. And I've been personally very interested in more tactical, operational kind of, events. Like if you bring smart people together, how do you draw out of them things that are actually useful and practical? Like if I had a Ash, on a panel, instead of just getting your high level feedback on what needs to change about healthcare, like I'd love to hear from you, what you actually did to grow a business from 0 to 50 million, 100 million in revenue. How did you do that? What were the channels in which you built kind of a commercial team? How did you end up being successful there? What were your lessons learned? Things not to do? I just wish we could get more of those insights out of people. And it sometimes feels like the executives are coached not to share those things. But that's the reason why we all show up. It's to really get those nuggets of wisdom that can help us get ahead.
Well, I think you need to have also these like small dinners, right? Or small group sessions for those candid conversations. I feel like those are really useful and helpful. And I love it when people throw those.
Yeah, I agree. Those are the best because you actually do learn and you share what you know. I mean, for us, the CEO sisterhood basically gets to that exactly because we are all CEOs. We have to be all acting CEOs, and we get together and share ideas. But I'd love to. I mean, if any of our listeners, if you're aware of high value conferences for others where they can truly learn and more high level networking, more effective networking, you guys should send us that information.
Okay, guys, let's shift topics now that we've talked about what needs to change from a events perspective. We can't not talk about the economy. I I have not been able to log into my bank account because it's just too depressing to see, it's like literally my retirement, right? That I've been working for the past 15 years. And I think a lot of people are facing that. The economy is just like absolutely on the edge, on the brink right now, in large part because of tariffs. And we're facing a recession. As I mentioned, biotech is getting very crushed right now. I think there are pockets of healthcare that are faring less badly because, healthcare does have this kind of domestic aspect to it that I think means it's, less affected by the tariffs, but the whole economy in general is in a tailspin. So both of you tell me, maybe I'll pick on Luba first, but how do you feel about all this? Like, how is your mental health? Like, any crystal ball kind of gazing predictions, projections that you can share?
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm doing well, and I have to say, yes, there are a lot of people in biotech that are in panic. I would call it not even we're beyond frustrated mode and angry mode now. There is more of a panic mode, and I think that's too bad because ultimately, and I think eventually we have to just learn how to, instead of being frustrated and angry, to channel that frustration into actionable things. And also recognize that not everybody's built for biotech. We're doing something highly innovative. We are all taking personal risks as well as risks with just generally, but the science is a very risky thing. None of us are guaranteed jobs or guaranteed return on investment, but there has to be something that's pushing us to innovate so that we can make medicines for patients and treat patients and make it better for people that are living with terrible diseases and have no cures. So today you're seeing people in terms of mentally, even those that are much more resilient and are understanding of what it takes to succeed in biotech. I think that they're doing okay. Again, nobody's doing really great, but I think that they're doing okay. And what's happening in the market? We just saw the FDA, as an example, issue a press release that they're no longer requiring, in certain circumstances, certain types of animal studies before development of monoclonal antibodies. And that actually makes a lot of sense. So, and it's encouraging news to hear some of, at least initially, some sense from the FDA that they are looking into how drugs are developed and seeing if there are some ways that we can do a better job. Of course, we all recognize that what has been happening is not ideal. And those people that are thinking more, okay, we're frustrated, but what can we do next? Instead of complaining, are the ones that are, that are doing well and going to succeed in this environment. And fundraising is hard for everyone. Fundraising has been very difficult for biotech for a few years now. So this is nothing new. It's even harder now. But now fundraising is hard for everyone, not just for biotech, but it's hard for the life sciences. It's hard for tech as well. And you just have to figure out as an entrepreneur how to raise, how to keep a lean team.
But how fair is that though? Because, the pharmaceutical industry like relies so heavily on global sourcing. So these
Yes.
tariffs are impacting stocks for that specific reason. And that's going to have a trickle down effect potentially to fundraising, depending on how much investors believe that these are long-term changes. So I'm with you on like, you've got to, not everybody's cut out for biotech, but then there's also, these are like things that are happening on a macro level that make it extremely challenging because of the increase in raw materials like manufacturing production
Yep.
costs.
Tariffs are certainly stirring up uncertainty, and we should talk about this, but I'm always surprised when someone says we're so shocked that the Trump administration, is levying or even discussing these tariffs. I mean, Trump's been talking about tariffs for like decades, 3-4 decades now. So he started this conversation in the first administration, and he tried out some of these things. So I feel like this was expected, and I would have thought that some of our sectors would have been more prepared for this. And it's really unfortunate that We are so unprepared for these conversations. We rely heavily on imported stuff. I think, like Luba said, generic drugs to medical devices. I think if I remember correctly, India and China make up more than half of our generic drug supply. Am I right, Luba?
Yes.
Yeah. So that means we're going to have more likely higher pricing for consumers, pricing for health systems. I actually worry for the hospital systems. I would have thought that they would be prepared for this because they're already getting, squeezed, right? And now it's a total gut punch. They're looking at pricier supplies and how are they going to keep them affordable for the consumers? I feel like the plans and the hospital systems are going to pass these on to the consumers. So I do worry about that. Am I off here?
No, I agree. You and I are aligned on that part.
There are a lot of people that didn't think Trump was going to be elected a second time. And I recognize that you kind of have to have contingency plans for everything, but healthcare has not been historically good at advanced planning for things that may or may not happen in the future, that maybe you could say, with the benefit of hindsight, we should have been prepared. Like, look at the pandemic. Like, healthcare was not at all prepared for the pandemic. And all kinds of experts had been saying for a long time that this could happen and probably would happen. So I don't know. It's something to do with like human beings, maybe.
How do we build a more resilient system? Because that's uber frustrating that we just went through a pandemic and we talked about how we shouldn't repeat the same mistakes. And yet here we are in another, era of economic turbulence. And I feel like we're having the same conversations again and again.
We're always having the same conversations again and again. I think that's a general kind of truism. Really, truly, like nothing changes, which actually brings me to another topic that I wanted to talk to you guys about. And that is AI. I just saw this interesting report that came out a couple of weeks ago from the Peterson Health Technology Institute looking at the scribing technologies and the role that they've had in health systems. And one of the kind of interesting insights from this report was really around just cost savings and were we getting cost savings from this kind of AI-based scribing technology. And I think it was really kind of, mixed. A lot of systems said, no, we're not getting any cost savings. I mean, these tools are great because it keeps physicians happy and it reduces burnout, but we haven't, laid anybody off or done anything that really kind of reduced costs at the system level because of them. So that was pretty interesting to me. And I wanted to kind of throw it out there to both of you, while we're talking about healthcare being slow to change, are you seeing any evidence that AI is really doing anything that could bring down costs after really decades of inflation?
We're talking about AI and we're going to introduce all these, avatars and AI workflows, et cetera, but we're dealing with like infrastructure from the 50s and 60s. I am actually quite pro AI and where it can come in and help reduce administrative burden, take prior auth, for example. I think there's a lot that AI can do to pull data. It can do automated approvals, right? It can do that in seconds. But I think you need to address the back-end data first. It's garbage in, garbage out. And in healthcare, unfortunately, we're still working with like very archaic infrastructure. And I'm not sure the data that's going in is what you want to put into an AI that's giving you output where it's making decisions for people. That's probably why we still have humans in the loop and should in healthcare scenarios. AI is a great co-pilot at this stage. So I understand why people are not getting replaced.
Yeah, there's also I completely agree. I mean, there's one of the issues that you just called out is the lack of infrastructure. I would say the second main issue, and the reason why there has been lack of infrastructure change and updating, is because hospitals, especially those that are also part of research institutes and have a lot of research, have focused on research, which is great, but they have also had extraordinary bloated staff. They have relied on overstaffing everything. And I'm talking about administrative staff. I'm not talking about clinical staff, from physician assistants or nurse practitioners or physicians, staff that input information, they're there, that are processing information. And it's just too much. And there hasn't been pressure on hospitals to be more efficient. And some of the things that we're actually seeing right now that the administration is doing is forcing some of the hospitals to rethink about how to start running the hospitals more efficiently. And I don't know if I believe the data that having scribes is not going to reduce cost. I definitely believe the data that having scribes increases benefits for physicians, which is very important. Sure, it frees up time for them to have a conversation and think about what are the best ways to treat a patient. So I would see a benefit to patients. And I don't see that there is, and I understand why there isn't an immediate translation to cost cutting, because that's a separate thing. There is little appetite to cut administrative staff at hospitals, and that has to change because a lot of those costs are then transferred onto patients, transferred onto payers, transferred onto employers, and something's got to change. And I think that many hospitals are looking into that exact change. Now, this is US data. If you look into implementation of AI in places like Singapore, in places like Korea, in modern new hospitals in other countries, certainly having Scribe, almost all of them have AI Scribe, almost all of them use AI for scheduling. When you come in, you don't see as much administrative staff there. You see a lot of physicians and physician assistants and other clinical staff that are there for patients and that have now been freed up to focus on real patient care. So that's what I would focus on. So for me, AI, completely agree with Ash. AI is not going to be replacing the clinical staff. The AI is going to allow the clinical staff to do their job.
Yeah, that is fair. And I think the co-pilot, I like that idea for clinical staff. And I also like the idea of less administrators, because it's just, we've seen this just absolutely bonkers increase in administrators relative to the growth in actual clinicians. And it is a little insane, and it just continues year after year.
Hey everyone, we'll get right back to the conversation after a word from our sponsors.
Today, I'm excited to share a true scientific breakthrough for your long-term health. C15, the first essential fatty acid discovered in 90 years, and it's 3 times better, broader, and safer than omega-3. Dr. Stephanie Van Watson discovered C15 while working with the US Navy to improve the health of aging dolphins. Here's why this matters. Many of us are deficient in C15, resulting in weaker cells that make less energy and quit working earlier than they should. This makes us age faster, sleep poorly, and feel sluggish. C15 is a science-backed, vegan-friendly supplement with pure C15 as its only ingredient. It strengthens your cells, improves mitochondrial function, and protects against damaging free radicals, supporting better metabolic, heart, and liver health, plus deeper sleep and healthier hair, skin, and nails. Unlike fish oil supplements that often go bad, Fatty 15 naturally protects against oxidation. It even comes in a beautiful reusable glass and bamboo jar with eco-friendly refills. Ready to restore your long-term health? Get 15% off your 90-day subscription starter kit at fatty15.com/secondopinion using code secondopinion at checkout. This show is sponsored by MIDI Health. There are certain things that come with age: wisdom, experience, and knowledge, to name just a few. But if you're a woman over 40, it can also bring some less desirable things: hot flashes, insomnia, brain fog, moodiness, and weight gain, all symptoms of menopause and perimenopause. Yes, hormonal transition is a fact of life, but that doesn't mean you should have to accept its symptoms as just another part of aging. The experts at MIDI Health understand what you're going through and know how to help. MIDI Health is the only virtual care clinic for women navigating midlife hormonal transition. They support you with safe, effective, FDA-approved medications, as well as supplements, lifestyle coaching, and preventative health guidance. What's more, all their services are covered by insurance, and they're conveniently accessible through telehealth visits and 24/7 messaging. If you're over 40, use all that wisdom you've gained over the years and visit MIDI Health. You deserve to feel great. Book your virtual visit today at joinmidi.com. That's joinmidi.com.
Can I just talk about the FDA, right? So let's go back to the FDA because we talked about this as it relates to this. So FDA has also had pretty stringent hurdles for regulatory and very strong regulatory oversight over tools that could be, again, that co-pilot to physicians and co-pilot to healthcare providers. And, right now is the new administration and the FDA is looking some of the things that they could be doing that will improve patient outcomes, that will lower costs. They should take a look at the heavy regulatory burden on some of these tools. It doesn't need to be that onerous, really, on many of these companies.
I don't know if you guys saw, but CMS dropped a massive announcement of a 5-ish% payment increase for MA plans. Did you see that in 2026? Yeah, it is a huge leap. I mean, I think it was initially, the number floated initially was a 2.2% increase, but they actually came out at 5+%. And that is pumping, I would say, an extra $25 billion into the insurers. And so, if you look at the stocks for United, Humana, or the impact for smaller plans, they got a huge boost. So I thought that was very interesting coming out of this administration, because people have been talking about MA plans and MA plans decreasing. It sounds like the MA stocks actually jumped and investors love this news. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
I love it. I mean, we always talk about value-based care and improving outcomes for patients. So far, the only way to do that properly and measure it properly and deploy value-based care really is through MA plans. So that seems to me as a no-brainer, and we have an increasingly aging population. So I think that's a great idea, and I hope it fairly quickly translates into savings.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, MA with this administration, I think everybody sort of expected MA to get a boost. I was definitely paying attention and in many ways not surprised. I think a lot of folks are preparing for that. The question and concern I have really is Medicaid. And I think everybody's worried about Medicaid. So yeah, I mean, Ash, anything there? Like, I know you sort of have stayed relatively close, given you have this policy background to both administrations. Do you think that we should be as worried about Medicaid as we are?
I mean, the administration has been fairly tight-lipped on what they're going to do with Medicaid, but the general conversations, to your point, have been on decreasing, at least people are expecting decreasing federal funding into Medicaid, right? Having said that, I think, at least from what I've heard from Dr. Oz in various settings, he has been really highlighting the fact that we need to take better care of our underserved populations. And he says he's going to work really closely with states. He's been calling out doing something about maternal mortality and morbidity and infant mortality. I read something recently which was shocking to me, by the way, that more than 80 to 90% of the Medicaid technology budget comes from CMS federally. I didn't know this. And from what I've heard, it's quite inefficient in the way the technology is deployed. So I think there are a lot of places where you can actually reduce, not by getting rid of people or stopping payments to Medicaid and Medicare. This administration is actually thinking about ways to improve functionality of the technology, reduce spending on things that are administrative. But I think they are going to expect states to be a lot more efficient in how they take care of things.
Yeah, I don't know. I continue to kind of fret on that front, just because of the kind of prospect of reduced spend and what that means for just, I mean, there are states in which literally a third of the population is on Medicaid and so reliant on it. Shifting topics away from policy and back to kind of health tech and the industry, Hinge Health, first IPO prospect in quite a long time truly in digital health. I mean, I would say it's a health tech company. And everybody kind of got excited when we saw the S1 and the news. And then now I'm reading in Business Insider this new report that perhaps they won't IPO because of the tariffs and the economy just being as unpredictable as it is. What do you all think about this kind of whiplash? Do you think they could still IPO? Is there an opportunity to do so? Or is it just the right thing to kind of, play it safe, stay private, and just watch the market a little bit longer?
Yeah, it's a good question. I I completely understand why they would want to play it safe and is in this market right now. I'm not sure why truly anyone would want to, at least in the next month or so, would want to go and do an IPO. So I don't think that that's completely, even though they have the right fundamentals and they would be a great candidate in any other environment, just when there's so much volatility, and there'll continue being volatility. Again, I'm much more optimistic usually about these things. I know everybody's talking about recession. It will last a long time. That's okay, I think, if we can see what's going to happen in a few months. But given the high amount of volatility today, I probably wouldn't do it. And staying private is a good idea for them. They'll just build more value, and when the markets are ready, even if they're not the perfect market, they can go out, but just not right now.
The IPO market's just been generally delayed, and health tech has certainly been dead quiet for years now. So if one is going to go out, I'd want it to be super successful. So I get it. Nobody wants to be a poster child for a failed digital health IPO. I certainly don't want that. I'm rooting for all of these companies. So I get it. If there are jitters, just hold on, run your business, run it well, and wait for the right opportunity. It's going to come.
Yeah, I think so too. I would probably suggest to them, not that I'm advising them, but if I, if I was having a beer with the CEO, I would probably say the same thing. It's just such an important IPO. Digital health just hasn't seen any kind of companies really exit like this in a while. And so the whole industry is watching and waiting and just really kind of paying attention to what happens with Hinge. And I think it would honestly have a real dampening effect on funding going into health tech if this IPO did not do well. So much so that I saw some kind of funny jokes on Twitter that like everybody in the industry should just like buy and hold Hinge shares as soon as possible, because none of us can succeed. None of these companies can do well and continue to raise capital if Hinge doesn't do well. So I think I, for one, would rather they kind of waited until the right moment.
Yeah, and they've got a massive market, right? Like they've got a broad market to go into, and it sounds like they have a really good business. So hold the course if there's no urgency.
Yep, totally agree with that. Okay, so we've covered the IPO market, the economy, HES. What else, ladies? What else is going on?
I have a question for Luba. Back to the FDA. Clearly, there's a lot of like doging of FDA from what I've been hearing. I saw that Peter Marks, the vaccine chief, left, and I think that sent a lot of shockwaves in the biotech industry. It sounds like there's been general impact to the biotech ETF. How are you guys thinking? What do you think people are talking about and thinking about in getting new drugs certified, new technologies certified, or even our earlier conversation around AI? Do you think, what is the new strategy over at the FDA that you're hearing about? And what's the impact?
Yeah, and by the way, I like the new doging. I haven't heard that, so I'm going to be using that from now on. I love that. So I'll finish with biotech. I'll start on the I and the tech side, and just as I had mentioned, there is, with the people that are involved in advising the FDA, there seems to be a potential to have more straightforward and faster approvals. And when I say more straightforward, one example is something like digital twins, where the FDA has really been lagging, even though there's quite a bit of evidence that having and allowing for that and approving the use of digital twins in clinical trials would expedite things quite and be beneficial for patients ultimately. So on the health tech side, on the tech side, yes, there's some positive discussions. MedTech, the FDA's previous stand has been, it actually, some have talked about even making it more strict, the approvals, and closer to biotech type of a regulatory environment, which would have really damaged MedTech. MedTech is already a very difficult industry to succeed in. There are not that many acquirers, not that many IPOs. There are a lot of smaller, innovative companies, and there's very little investment. So that would have been and would have continued damaging the industry. So there is some interest in seeing what the administration, and it could only be going in a positive direction for medtech. Now, when we go to biotech, I do want to say, the FDA is getting some great advice currently from the industry. And the industry is urging the FDA to, vaccines aside, but outside, when we're thinking about how do we get into a drug through even IND? So how do you get a drug to basically into the clinic? And the hurdles are so high and they're really hurting us. So one area of interest for many in biotech is the FDA going to make that process easier and faster, ease some of the requirements? Another thing that's driving this is we've seen the dominance right now of China in biotech. And one of the reasons for that dominance, actually one of the basically almost the major reason for that dominance of Chinese biotechs, is because of lower regulatory hurdles. They're able to get into and get very important data, phase 1, phase 2, so much faster for the same exact, just to give you an example, there have been some molecules that if you take it in China, you can already right now in phase 2, the same molecule in the US is still preclinical.
And if I had one wish for the incoming administration, I would say, let's have better FDA CMS coordination. I feel like you hear about these amazing drugs or devices that are coming that are going to help solve, whatever cancer or cure this, etc. But the consistent number I hear is from innovation to actually reaching patients is 17 years. And a lot of it has to do with FDA approvals to what you're talking about, but it's also payment, right? These CMS codes don't get generated for a decade after FDA approvals. Have a way so that when you get FDA approvals, you also get a CMS code approved so that these things can come to market and have patient impact faster. That would be my one wish for this administration.
I love that. And especially in areas that are, again, where you would have actually quite a high impact is, for example, in neurospace. So the FDA has put so many hurdles for digital therapeutics for neuro, which would have been very beneficial, especially for young people, for adolescents with things like ADHD or autism. And it was almost impossible for digital therapeutics to be approved and then get reimbursed. So collaboration in that space would have been very helpful. And of course, a completely different way to look at the neurospace and revise the way that they require for trials, for therapeutics, but even more importantly for digital therapeutics would have made a huge difference for patients and would have changed the cost structure as well of many SSRIs and other drugs.
All right, guys. Well, I feel like we really got into it this episode, and we want to do more of these. So let us know what you think. Do you enjoy this new format? It's really kind of more of a chatting through the news and kind of events that we've seen go on in the industry. So let us know if you want more. Reach out to us. We're Ash, Luba, Chrissy, and to my co-host, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Love chatting with you, gal pals, anytime. See you soon.
Thanks for tuning in to Second Opinion. Share it with colleagues and friends and message us to let us know what topics you want to discuss on the podcast. If you want to support the show, the best ways are to leave a review wherever you're listening and make sure you are subscribed. And check out Christina's Second Opinion newsletter on Beehive. A link to subscribe is in the episode description. Second Opinion is part of Turpentine, the podcast network behind Turpentine DC, Age of Miracles, and more shows for experts by experts in tech.
Hey everyone, Eric here. At Turpentine, we're building the first media outlet for tech people by tech people. We're the network behind the show you're listening to right now. We have a slate of hit shows across a range of topics and industries, from our AI and investing cluster of podcasts to shows that drive the conversation in tech with the most interesting thinkers, founders, investors, and influencers, like Econ 102 with Noah Smith. We're launching new shows every week, and we're looking for industry-leading sponsors. If you think that might be you and your company, email me at ericaturpentine.co. That's ERIK at turpentine.co, and let's partner together.